Hi, everyone, and welcome to another conversation with Carrie and Dani. Today, we're going to continue our conversation just about women in the Bible, about women of beauty that got themselves in situations, sometimes with no fault of their own, how we interpret these stories as kids or how we think of them as adults. And last episode that we talked about this, we talked about Esther. Today, we'd
Mm.
like to focus a little bit about David and Bathsheba and see where this conversation goes. I've been doing a little bit of research and we'll see what happens. Dani, what do you remember about the story of David and Bathsheba?
Right. Well, I was actually going to do some reading on this because I knew this was a topic that you really wanted to speak on. But I'm sorry, family issues have just sucked up my time. So I'm going to have to think back. It's not something I recall. It's not a story I remember hearing in church anytime as an adult, really much. I remember it from Pathfinders, church school, and stories when I was younger. I don't recall a sermon on that anytime in the last 10 years that I was in church. So what I remember is that King David committed wasn't a really good, he made some mistakes, but he was a man after God's own heart and proof that God could forgive anyone. And one of the mistakes he made was that this beautiful lady called Bathsheba, she tempted him, and it was really her fault that he sinned and did all this stuff because she was beautiful and basically she tempted him with her naked body and yeah, caused him to sin and do a whole pile of stuff. And it was sort of fairly loosely touched on, um, but it was very clear that it wasn't David's fault, and it was normally preceded by some sort of a talk about modesty, dressing correctly, not causing someone else to stumble, and being sure and careful that, as a female, I wasn't tempting any man to like have sinful or lustful thoughts by how I dressed or my clothes or what I might say or flirting or any of those other things. So my memories of it is that, I remember that the details, as in she was beautiful and that he had her husband bonked off or killed so that he could keep her because he loved her so much because she was so beautiful and he had to have her and things like that. But more, I remember it as a cautionary tale of how I'm not to let and cause anyone else to stop.
Right. Because as a woman, so much of our responsibility is to keep people from stumbling.
Stumble by my
Yes.
attitude, cause a man to do things.
Yes. Yeah, so you're close. I think that that's the impression that we were given a lot. And I think some background on David. Um, First, what you had said, that he was a man after God's own heart. Um, I I checked it that that statement is found two times in the Bible. Once in 1 Samuel 13, verse 14, and this is when Samuel is talking to Saul.
Hmm.
But now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has appointed him to be ruler over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. This is before David even became king, that God said that David was a man after his own heart. So, and this is also quoted in Acts.
Oh, I thought it was in Hebrews for some reason.
I, I didn't find it in Hebrews. There might be some, I mean, I may have missing. Y'all can correct me in the comments if you feel you need to. This is Acts 13:22. Um, when it says, when he had removed him, God speaking of Saul, he made
Yeah.
David their king. In his testimony about him, he said, I have found David, son of Jesse, to be a man after my own heart, who will carry out all of my wishes. So this was both talking about him before he started as king. So when people say David was a man after God's own heart, he was at the beginning. I mean, and I think that he made a ton of mistakes, but I think we're misquoting to attribute potentially saying that David, over his entire lifetime, his entire reign as king, that he was a man after God's own heart. He was not always
That's
pursuing God's desires.
so the one I'm thinking of in Hebrews is Hebrews 11, and it's what they that like whole hall of
Sure,
faith thingy where they talk about all the yeah, all the super faithful people.
sure.
He's mentioned in there somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, he probably is, but that phrase, man after God's own heart, was only referring to David's only found two times in the Bible that I could find.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
it's interesting. Um, so I'm going to share a screen I found, if I can remember how to do this. Uh, Share. Okay. Can you see that, Danny? So
Yes,
so
just
this is
make it a bit bigger.
David's family tree. Smack dab in the middle right here is David, and these are all of his wives.
Oh, he had a few more than I was aware
So
of.
he
Now
had
that you
10
put it up like
concubines.
that.
So I recommend if people just sit down and read about David's life after he became king. I'm not going to go into all of it, but there's a lot of sordid, weird details with all of this stuff. But Michael was, I believe, his first wife. She was the daughter of King Saul.
I
Then
remember her.
Abigail, she had been married to Nabal, I believe his name was. And Nabal died because he was scared of David. And then all of these other ones that I don't know the stories behind them. Then there was 10
Oh,
concubines. Then he married Bathsheba. Well, what happened with Bathsheba was that it was not did not his their relationship did not start out as an honest relationship from his perspective. He was out on the roof. He looked over and saw her in her home or on her own roof taking a bath. And he's like, she's pretty. I want her. So he sends his people to go get her. He spent the night with her and she got pregnant. And she was married to Uriah the Hittite, who was serving in David's army. So when he found out that she was pregnant, he freaked out, understandably so, because he assumed that he wasn't going to get caught. He's king. And so he wanted Uriah to come home. He sent for Uriah from the battle, said, come home. He wanted Uriah to spend the night with his wife. So, in the timing, potentially cover up the fact that Bathsheba was pregnant with a baby that wasn't her husband's. Uriah, as a man of integrity, and I believe somewhere in the Mosaic law, it says that when a man is in battle, he should not spend time with his wife. So he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay here. So David got frustrated because he wanted him to go spend time with his wife. So he got Uriah drunk, hoping that in when he got his inhibitions down, he'd forget about his principles and go home and spend time with his wife. He refused to do it. So David wasn't sure what he was going to do, and then he decided, and this is the Carrie paraphrase. So he decided to get Uriah killed in battle. So he gave Uriah a letter, I'm sure that was sealed, to give to the general and the general, and it basically said, put Uriah in the front line and
remember that.
allow him to be killed. So Uriah was killed. So Bathsheba spent the appropriate time in mourning, which was a week or so. And then David brought her to the palace and she became his wife officially. So he thinks he's gotten away with all of it. And then sometime later, after the baby is born, the prophet Nathan comes and tells him the story of
Mm,
the rich man who was entertaining a guest and said, I'm going to steal the poor man's lamb.
yep.
So David gets mad because he feels for the little guy. He was a shepherd. He knows how important a lamb is. And Nathan said, you are that man. So David became very contrite. The baby did ultimately end up dying of sickness as a punishment from the Lord. And then Solomon was born later. Um, Bathsheba was his mom. So Solomon ultimately became um, the next king. So that's the Carrie paraphrase with all of this. Sometimes the story is presented that Bathsheba was also complicit in the adultery, as you were saying. Um, she, so I did watch, I had sent you a link, Dani, on that old movie. There was an old movie in the 50s called David and Bathsheba. If you should, if guys, if you want to just kill an hour while you're, or two while you're doing housework or whatever, that's what I was doing. And it very much portrayed Bathsheba in the way that Dani was saying, that she deliberately tempted David. It was more of a love match. They did end up getting married, and it's just more the feel good, but the adultery icky stuff in there as well.
Mm.
Um, so that's interesting. Then I asked my son, I said, "What do you remember of the story of David and Bathsheba?" And he's like, the first thing he could think of was Veggie Tales, King George and the Ducky, which is very cute. I mean, I think it kind of shows the principle of all of this from a child-friendly perspective. I think it's cute. I love Veggie Tales. I think it's adorable. But that just made me laugh. My son's 23 years old, and that's the first thing you could think of was King George and the Ducky. Um, but I there's a it's interesting now. I think probably 20, 30 years ago, or maybe longer, there was not the whole concept of consent and the power dynamics in relationships. And I think that's very similar how we were speaking about Esther as well. When the king wants something done, it happens. And what is the woman to say? We don't know how this all went down. We do know she got pregnant by the king. So will you, would this be defined as adultery? Would this be defined as rape?
Mm.
When this story is referenced later on in the Bible or in other things, she's never listed or talked about as if she had sinned. I don't believe that it was always David. So there was more consequences um, than just the death of the baby. I found an article talking about, and one of the comparisons that just really makes me nauseous is comparing Donald Trump and King David. Donald Trump is flawed too. Anyway, we're not going to go there. Anyhow, so the aftermath of David's sin and his repentance, a few observations. Number one, so this is what happens. The sword Nathan the prophet tells David that because of what he does, the sword will never depart from your house. The statement is not so much a punishment as a statement of fact. Violence, whether by word or by hand, breeds violence. Number two, in particular, that violence takes the specific form of sexual violence against women, thus combining and amplifying the two flaws of David in one. The very next chapter of Samuel reports that David's son Ammon raped his half-sister Tamar, thereby consigning herself to a life of ruin. In response, David was angry, but he didn't do anything. It is clear that David's inaction stems from the knowledge of his own weakness and culpability, silencing
Mm.
him in the face of sexual violence against women. This proves to be a key point in the unraveling of his family and kingdom. So there was a lot of messy stuff that happened with David before Bathsheba, but it got way messier after. I mean, the stories are just trying to keep all of the names straight and everything. So, three, out of anger for David's passivity, Absalom had Ammon killed to avenge his sister. The story is told in a way that recalls the story of David having his men kill Uriah, showing the impact of David's life in his son and would-be successor. So Absalom would have been king, but for all of this. The fallout continues. David refused to reconcile with his son after Absalom avenges Tamar. David grew ever inactive to the point where Absalom led a military revolt because David failed to enact justice. Um, let's see. Number five, Ahithophel, who is Bathsheba's grandfather, aided Absalom in a revolt against David. Clearly, this is retaliation for what David did to Bathsheba and Uriah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean,
Yeah,
I know all these stories because we studied them, but that
yeah.
one, I didn't realize that one.
Again, okay, so here's where this is the not safe for kids. There, all of this is maybe not new. Again, sexual violence plays a prominent role. Ahithophel encouraged Absalom to, we'll say grape, because we don't want to get a problem, all the king's concubines on the rooftop of David's palace, therefore a tenfold revenge. So I had showed you the family tree with all of the 10 concubines.
Yeah.
They were all assaulted on the rooftop.
I missed that story when I read it
Hmm.
as well.
So that's in 2 Samuel 16:21 to 22. David later degraded and ruined the lives of these concubines since they were spoiled. He had them shut up until the day of their death, living as widows. Number six, he ended his life avenging the lives of those he promised not to kill. For instance, he says to Solomon, "Note well, you still have to contend with Shemi, who tried to call down upon me." It just gets so messy. And then seven, is it any wonder that David's son Solomon required countless wives, eventually leading to the division of the kingdom? The elderly Solomon loved women, power, and money more than God, and because of the way he treated people, he tore the nation apart. So it's just, I mean, how there are so many events that led up to this one, but just the generational trauma that's heaped upon this family is crazy. I
It,
mean,
the it's way bigger than I was.
yeah, yeah. And it's so I remember I listened to a lot of your story hour because it was always broadcast Friday night at 7 or 7:30 and then Saturday morning at 7:30, I think, because we live close to Andrews University. And I don't think I do know that they did. I remember them talking about some of these stories about how Absalom was killed by David's general because he got caught in the tree. Do you remember that part of
Yep.
the
Yeah,
story?
with his
Yep.
long his beautiful long
Beautiful,
hair was his
long,
downfall.
curly hair. Yes.
Yep. But I
Yes.
remember that being taught to me also as a whole thing about vanity. It was his vanity that killed him.
Hmm.
So we shouldn't be vain.
Yes. Yeah. I
The
mean,
Bible doesn't actually say that though, I'm sure of it.
right. But I think we're always desperate to draw lessons from everything. And sometimes it's just icky, you know? Sometimes
Yeah.
those Bible stories are just icky. Um, I had to look up because I wanted to see what does Ellen White have to say about Bathsheba. Not much, honestly. She described her as the one whose fatal beauty proved a snare to the king. So apparently he didn't have the self-control to control himself. Obviously he didn't. Because I mean it must be Bathsheba's fault. Heaven forbid y'all take a bath when you're supposed to, when it's mandated by the Mosaic law, is why she was taking a bath. So, anyway. But
I
yeah, so there's other articles that just kind of talk about tying in all of those things. One thing that I'll put in here, in Matthew, when we're talking about it's the genealogy of
mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Yep.
That is Matthew 1, verse 6. Says, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah.
Oh, I didn't realize it was specified like that actually. I
Mhm.
mean, I've read it, but the implication of that hadn't hit me.
Yeah. So even in Matthew, it's still they're not letting him get away with it.
Wow.
So that's, but she became part of her along with um Rahab and Ruth and Tamar,
Yep. Are the only women in the genealogy.
and all of them are, I suppose you say, spoiled, you know? So it's I just ordered a book. What does God think about women? So I'm going to be interested to read that one.
When you were telling the story, I was thinking that it's ironic that as a general rule, women spend so much time, so much emotional energy, and so much money on wanting to be beautiful.
Hmm.
Face creams, hair dye, lipsticks, and things in the pursuit of beauty. And I believe that you only have to look at the world that God's created to see that beauty is important. Otherwise, if beauty wasn't important to God, we wouldn't have amazing smelling flowers, butterflies and colors of the rainbow, and sunsets that just make our hearts explode
Hmm.
with, with awe. But it's just sad how humanity's twisted it and ruined it and abused it. And I was just thinking, beauty's something we all aspire to be. We all want to be beautiful and desired. And then you read the Bible stories and see how being beautiful actually was a bit of a curse. Some really bad shit happened to the really pretty ones.
At the hands of men with power, and any man would have power over any woman, really, at that stage, and it was women were so much considered property, and the whole story is just it's sad. I mean, it's just how people can how this split second of and I wonder, so what if Uriah had gone home,
Yeah, good
you know?
question.
And it's painted. So of course, when we're talking about Bible stories, where do I go?
The
I
Blue Book.
the blue books, the blue book,
Blue books.
the blue book. So there wasn't a ton. I mean, I don't think that they were deceitful in any way that they told the story, but they kept it child appropriate, because there's some details in that story that the kiddos that are reading this book or having it read to them maybe shouldn't hear. But so here's a couple of paragraphs here. It says, as was the custom in those days, David had many wives and lots of children. Indeed, his house must have been overrun with boys and girls who called him father. Surely one would think he had enough to make and keep him happy. But no, as often happens with those whom God has given much, he wanted more, something he well knew he should not have. Nobody likes to tell the story, but yet it must be told. While the army was away at Rabbah, David fell in love with the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of his finest and noblest soldiers. Then, to make matters worse, he wrote a letter to Joab ordering him to put Uriah in the front of the hottest battle so that he would be killed. And he asked Uriah to carry the letter, his own death warrant. And that shows how one mean thing leads to another. Imagine what Joab must have thought when he received such a letter from the king. Surely he must have wondered what had gone wrong. Yet he obeyed his master. Uriah was sent up to close to the wall of Rabbah where the valiant men were, and in the course of fighting met his death. And then it continues, and then he tells the story of Then the next chapter tells the story that the parable that Nathan the prophet
Hmm.
told. And so it doesn't, I don't think it really I don't think it changes the absolute message of the story too much, but I'm pretty sure David didn't fall in love with Bathsheba. We call that lust, but you know. So anyway, I mean it's just it's such a cautionary tale too, you know? Be sure your sins will find you out.
I don't think I'd ever stopped to consider before that David didn't show any remorse until God sent a prophet to tell him it was wrong.
Hmm.
So I was just pondering that. That was all.
Well, and told him in a story that he could understand, probably made him think back to his days of being a little shepherd boy, you know, and taking care of the sheep and realizing that he was the rich man who decided to steal somebody's very much loved lamb, you know, and we have and Bathsheba is just kind of an sort of an accessory to the story, really, because
Yeah.
we don't know what she was thinking, what she was feeling. Did she truly love her husband? So the old 1950s movie that I watched um portrayed Bathsheba as only being married for a very short time to Uriah. She didn't really even like him. She knew the king would go up on his rooftop every day around the same time. So she deliberately made sure he saw her.
Yeah.
It
I've seen.
shows a confrontation with David and his wife Michael, who's the one who got after him for dancing. If you remember
Yeah.
that part of the story.
Yeah.
It shows David and Bathsheba frolicking through the meadows, you know, as they're walking around and just having lovely couple dates and picnics on the meadow and things. So it's just it paints it as a love story. And I
Yeah.
think
When
we're
you
doing a disservice to Bathsheba by painting it as a love story. Could it have become a love story? Possibly. But he stole her from her husband and then
well,
killed
and
the husband.
forced her to have sex
Right.
when she didn't really know him. Well, the Bible doesn't say she knew him.
One of the articles said that they may have been potentially loosely acquainted because her family served in the military. So
Mhm.
maybe they knew who each other was, potentially, but we don't know that for sure. Because it was her grandfather that
Yeah.
then helped with revenge, you know, so.
When you talk about that 1950s movie and you tell the story, I remember watching. I remember watching it. I can't think how far back, but it was a long time back. But yes, I remember watching that.
Hmm. Yep. It's on YouTube if anybody wants to, but make sure you read the biblical account before you watch the movie. Because just like many movies, it's very loosely based on the written. Oh, we have 10 minutes left.
Oh, I was just thinking back to what I said before, just to come back to it because the thought's growing slowly about
Hmm.
how David wasn't remorseful and didn't see his sin until God sent the prophet to tell him the story. So he told him the story, the parable, and then said, actually, you're that person once he already had the thought that was wrong. And I guess it was just sort of growing in my mind that how he didn't see what he'd done was wrong until God sent someone to tell him. And so that got me thinking about how societal norms
Mm.
impact what we believe is right and wrong. And then I got to thinking, I got to wondering what societal norms or what things that are normal in the society and the culture that I live in. What cultural norms do I just participate in, run around thinking, yeah, fine, that maybe if God had more prophets running around, might have something to say. Obviously, nothing as huge as what David and Bathsheba did, but It still just got me thinking, that was all,
Hmm.
about how what's the norm in the culture that we live in impacts sometimes our beliefs about what's right and wrong.
Hmm. I knew I couldn't make it through a whole video without a cat bugging us, so
I've locked mine out because,
if I did that, they'd be banging at the door. They'd be taking turns and then they'd start yelling. Just easier just to bring them in here.
well, see, it's really early in the morning here, so mine are still running around outside most of the time now. If it was 4 in the afternoon or 5, then yes, they'd be really complaining that they weren't inside in the warm having their evening dinner and
Oh yes.
stuff.
Yes, yes. Yeah, this story I think really highlights so many of the stories in the Old Testament that are descriptive, not prescriptive. Where it's a cautionary tale as well. And I think what happens is people with power or people just get used to getting whatever they want, and so they just start taking from other people. And I don't know how much we really can say because there's no happy ending to
No.
this. Um, I mean, Solomon was a part of the genealogy of Christ. Of course, Jesus would have come up from somewhere else. But it's just part of the story.
I think that the happy ending I was always sold growing up in the church was that David did some bad shit, but God forgave him, so God can forgive you anything you do. And while
Mhm.
that is a happy ending and something that's really good to remember, I think it's also really important to remember that we're not rescued from the consequences of our actions.
Yes.
And like you said, it affected many, many people for generations to come.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Yes, we can be forgiven, but then there's earthly consequences for the things that we have done, and to show true repentance as well after something. And he threw himself on the ground, and when the baby was sick, and then when the baby died, he got up and he said, well, that's, move on, I guess, but still he couldn't. And I think because of the that great sin that he had committed, he couldn't discipline his own children at this point, who are probably grown, definitely old enough to know what their dad just did, and say, so what are you going to do to me, old man?
I could just see that now that you put it that way.
Yeah,
That is
so
such a
I
good thing.
I think, as parents, for as a mom, for me, I'm just like, okay, kids are watching. Uh
Yeah.
Maybe don't do stuff like that. I mean, nobody should be doing stuff like that. But then there's these long-term consequences that continue to go and go and go. And consequences that just stay for a long time. Yes, I
Yeah.
think King David started out his reign as a man after God's own heart, but I do believe there was many, many things that he did that were wrong, and I think during these times he was not listening to the heart of God at all.
So I really like it when we get to the end of our videos and we have these discussions and we never know what rabbit hole we're going to end up in. But I
Hmm.
still like it when we can pull all the rabbit holes together and make this nice, tidy little summary and go goodbye on this wonderful thought. Well, I don't think this topic's going to be one of those days.
Mm-mm.
So it feels a little odd to finish a video just with shit happens, but God can make the best of it.
Poor thing, she's joining the ranks of Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho, Tamar, the woman who became pregnant by her father-in-law, and Ruth, who was a Moabite, which was in and of itself bad enough. So anyway, I think on that note, if you guys have any insightful thoughts about this story, any or anything you'd like to share, any comments, questions, concerns, I guess.
My
Um,
only com I've got one comment. My only
okay.
comment is I'm sitting here now thinking, I mean, I'm not going to say how old I am, but I'm old. I'm thinking of all the years of my life I spent wishing I was more of something that actually caused so many people so much pain. So I'm just like thinking that's a little ironic at this point and thinking, oh, why did I bother?
Yeah. Why did we bother? Well, I think that wraps it up, and we'll
Yeah,
see you all next time for another conversation with Carrie and Dani. Sometimes we can wrap it up in a nice, neat little package. Otherwise, we're just like, well, I guess that's what it
yeah.
was. Not a
No
warm,
need
fuzzy
packages
story,
today.
but there's
So go on, do your little thing. Go on, Gary. Like, comment,
like,
subscribe.
subscribe, comment. We'll see y'all next time. Talk to you later. Bye, all.